Hi everyone. Thanks for everyone's patience with the slight technical challenges there. Larissa, do you think we're okay to get going now?
Seems to be good now, Stuart.
Okay. Let me get organised. Right. Thanks everybody for being patient with us getting going. Welcome to this is the third workshop in the land use and land cover series that we're working through with the Earth Observation for Government Network. Before we start, I would like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, water and air in which we meet at the moment, and pay our respects to the elders past and present and their current and emerging leaders. So I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction to what we're going to try and cover today, and then we'll hop into some activities to look forward in terms of how we can use research and activities across our research, industry and government sectors to help with land use and land cover mapping. And in doing that, we'll do some of the background context to what we had covered previously as well. So two previous sessions last week, what we did in the first session on Tuesday was looking essentially at where were the, I guess, land use and land cover products that are, already operational or close to operational at a national, continental scale across Australia, and what were some of the priorities in terms of moving activities that were almost operational forward. And that drew a little bit on the workshops which we'd had in the Earth Observation for Government Network last year. There is a summary report in the participants folder which you can access and have a look through to see the high-level review that we did in August last year, which a number of you contributed to. The other thing, I guess, as just an operational matter as we progress through this, is if you do have questions, please type them into the chat window. Normally, we would just ask people to keep your microphone on mute until you've got a question. We will have discussion sections a little bit later on. Given that we do have a little bit more time today, we might do a quick run around, again, the country, just to see who's online today, because it is a nice diverse mix. And also, if you do have any technical challenges with the interface or accessing documents, we'll let you, please let us know about it. We'll try and fix it. So I just want to introduce Larissa Marfan, who works in the Earth Observation Australia office with us. Larissa's setting up and running these workshops and has posted the link to the Google Drive. And in that drive, you'll find the report from the workshop we did last year and some other background information as well. So sorry I didn't cover that before. So I talked about what we did on Tuesday. We had a follow-up meeting just after that, which really looked at government or operational requirements in terms of existing coordination bodies in land cover and land use. I won't go into. Apologies for those of you that have seen this diagram 10 or 20 times now, but we do have a broad group of people online. This is really just to point out the context of these discussions or workshops. And what we're trying to do is, if you look at the top line of that diagram, oops, sorry, I should share my screen, which is on the screen there. You should be able to see what we're actually going to be talking about. So what we're essentially trying to do is look at across all the different Earth observation communities in Australia in terms of how we take activities that are going on in research, and there's research going on in universities, in research institutions, in startups, in SMEs, government agencies, a range of different areas. How we take those activities through to approaches which are research proven, so we know they work in different areas. It could be over a catchment, state or territory, or even the country. And how do we move from something which is a research system which you can use when you need to but can't depend on 24/7, 365 days a year? How do we move it to an operational system which could be used at a national level, primarily by government in the instance of this whole set of workshops, but it also does end up being products and services which could possibly be used in industry and defence and other areas as well. So Earth Observation for Government Network has been set up. Initially it was set up to run from sort of research to operational at Commonwealth Government, and we've been able to broaden it a bit so we make sure we include state and territory government and start to include the other groups that are all part of this process as well. So by doing this, we're a couple of things, making sure that what our government agencies use as operational at a national level or state and territory level is based on sort of best on offer data and techniques that produces verifiable, accurate, authoritative information. That before it gets to that stage, we've got the different groups that are doing the research working in a coordinated way. So where we've got products and services that might be sitting in research infrastructure, so national collaborative research infrastructure, which isn't necessarily meant to be operational, even though I acknowledge it's used for that. How do we move it out of that sort of research space where it doesn't have long-term funding and support to actually being implemented operationally and keep the government activities at that high level? We also need to go back to the research agencies to make sure that we can enable people working in research institutions, universities, to focus on applications which are going to inform and be used in monitoring and management, whether it's at local, state and territory, or national levels. And ideally, we can get people to work together across these different areas, and it enables all of us to do our jobs. Government's able to use the best on offer information. Researchers are essentially focused in areas where we know people are going to pick up what they produce, and we can use the resources there to do it. So EOGN's trying to link across all of those different areas. So that's essentially where we're trying to come from, if we want to put it there. This is just a schematic of how these workshops operate and how this particular set of workshops on land cover and land use has operated so far, what we're going to do today, and where it goes after today. So the dark blue boxes at the top are the main EOGN activities that we've been involved in. And then the blue boxes below are some of the detail of what's happened at each of those. The one on the far left, in August last year, there was a several-day workshop in Canberra, and there was also some surveys. We tried to reach as many people as possible. Obviously, we didn't cover everyone. That's always an ongoing challenge. And that looked at, broadly across state and territory and Commonwealth with Earth observation applications, which ones are being taken through and used at a Commonwealth level, and tried to prioritise what were some of the activities which did need to move to operational or improved operational as soon as possible. And that was around vegetation properties, land cover, land use, water, topography and fire. So we've run a set of workshops on vegetation properties, mapping and monitoring, and this one's on land cover and land use. We did attempt to go back to the broader community of Earth observation data producers and information producers in Australia earlier this year to ask about how, was there any change from last year in terms of the research and the need for land use and land cover. Didn't get a huge response to that survey. That information is in the participants folder. These workshops were initially meant to be face-to-face, but for a whole range of reasons, we've moved them online, and that's helping us engage across the country. So the first workshop we did last Tuesday was looking at what research products were ready for transition, and that identified a number of key issues where existing land use mapping approaches, potentially in data and techniques, might need improvements, and how that might also link to land cover mapping. We did discuss the organising bodies, so the Australian Collaborative Land Use Mapping Program, and the NCLUMI, which is the National Collaborative Land Use and Mapping group that looks after ACLUMP. So I went through and talked about what that was, how it coordinates from state and territory to Commonwealth. Some specific updates requested for land use mapping applications, particularly going down to commodity level mapping in agriculture and horticulture. With land cover, we heard from Digital Earth Australia program. So Norman presented about where they are using the scheme which Richard Lucas has developed from the FAO for consistent land cover mapping, and how that's going to be released. The PowerPoints around those particular products, so the new land cover classification system and data are in the participants directory as well, if you want to download it and have a look at it. And then lastly, talking about training and validation and the potential to increase our activities in that area. And just want to be clear about what came out of that first workshop. None of that was suggesting that we remove ACLUMP or NCLUMI, or that what we're doing now replaces that in any way. We recognise those as existing bodies and are trying to fit in with them and help them move forwards. And that was a fair bit of what was discussed in the second workshop, along with how land cover fits into the land use mapping. That takes us to today, which is workshop 3. And really what we want to look at is, in terms of people's expertise across these areas, what are some key research directions which might help with land use mapping and land cover mapping, from local to state and territory scales to national. And that could be around data developments, algorithm and processing developments. The key thing is they have to link through to government applications there. By doing that, we're going to get people to have a think about, well, what are the most important ones that we could build on collaboratively and strategically. And then we'll finish off just talking about the idea of a transition planning document. The transition planning document are the summary reports that Earth Observation for Government Network produces from each of these workshops, and they essentially say, this is where there's research needed, this is where we could go from almost operational to operational, and how these things might actually happen. And then that's pushed forward as a set of recommendations as well. The other point I do want to mention is that box along the bottom there, and that's the role of industry. In land use and land cover, like a number of other areas, we do have definite roles for industry in here, and there's two levels here. At one level, we do have a number of groups across the country who are producing quite specialised land use mapping services, particularly in the agricultural and horticultural area, which relates to mapping crop types down to commodity level and looking at how those are changing over time. So that's one area where we have industry potentially mapping some of these things, and that may feed in with what we're doing in government potentially. The other point is we have industry using these. So particularly in agriculture and horticulture, where you have national growers representative groups, they do want to know, and they will use information on where all the crops are being grown and how that relates to their membership and services they provide. Those groups use the maps of land use and land cover. They're also quite engaged in some areas in validating and refining those maps with industry and government. And that's something that ideally we can sort of bring into the discussion here. So industry is, they're not just producers here, they're not just users. There's probably more of a role here than in vegetation than before. All right, so that's just some background on where we came from. There's some detail on what we covered in the last two workshops in terms of improvements, role of organisational bodies, land cover, land use validation. I summarised those previously. I'm not going to go into it in detail here. Oops. I'm just going to stop sharing there for the moment. Cool. And I'm just going to go around the room, or actually around the country, just so we can get a sense of the variety of people who are on the call and how you can contribute to what we're discussing. Then we're going to go into two focused discussions after that introduction to look at some, what are some quite specific directions that we could follow, and then how can we pull those together strategically as well. So what I might do is I'll just, if I can just identify people as we go around, if you can just introduce yourself and where you're from, and really briefly what you're working on. Keep in mind there's 30 people on the call here, so I do want to get through this quite quickly. So can you please keep it as brief as possible? And if you do take too long, I will cut you off. Sorry, but let's do that. All right, start with Megan Lewis.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, thanks for the chance of joining. So I'm at the University of Adelaide. I lead the Spatial Sciences Research Group here at Adelaide. I'm thinking of where we sit in your schema, Stuart. So yes, we do quite a bit of research, and we also do quite a bit of applied research, taking all sorts of forms of remote sensing Earth observation data and translating it into information that's useful primarily for government agencies. So the applications that we particularly specialise in would be arid land and rangeland assessment. We're currently in a project with South Australian Government that is using time series of satellite imagery to improve their assessment of rangelands. We also do quite a bit of coastal and wetland and water resources work. It's probably enough.
Might help if I mute myself. Jump over to Brendan McAtee.
Thanks, Stuart. So Brendan McAtee, Frontier SI. For me, we're doing a lot of work at the moment in that industry side, so that industry engagement between the science products that we deliver, making them operational, and how does that flow into industry. So I'm really interested in those kind of parts. I think there's a lot of opportunity for doing that, and we touched briefly on the industry piece, but as we make these things more operational, easily accessible, I think there's a lot of value to get out of those kind of pieces. So that's my short piece. Thanks, Stuart.
Rakesh.
I'm Rakesh Devadas from ABS. I'm currently working on national scale land use mapping.
Cool. Right. Thanks, Rakesh. Craig Shepherd.
Thanks, Stuart. Work with the Applied Agriculture Remote Sensing team with the UNE. Currently engaged in updating the national map of horticulture tree crops. Working closely with industries for 6 commodities.
Cool. Thanks, Craig. Moritz.
Good afternoon, Moritz van der Vlucht, Director at Mercury Project Solutions. We're doing a lot of consulting work recently for the Queensland government to help them develop a strategic direction for their land use mapping program, and here primarily to observe to see where the merging directions and land use land cover are going.
Cool. Thanks, Moritz. Sanjeev.
Hi, I'm Sanjeev Shrivastava. I'm senior lecturer at University of the Sunshine Coast, and I work on fire mapping work with Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and QPWS.
Cool. Thanks, Sanjeev. James Brinkoff.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I'm with the Applied Agricultural Remote Sensing Centre at UNE as well, working with Craig there, working mostly on tree crops mapping as well as yield prediction and other things like that.
Cool. Thanks, James. Tim Malthus.
Hi, Stuart and everybody else. Tim Malthus, CSIRO Oceans and Atmosphere. Mainly interested just in listening in. I didn't take part in the earlier workshops, keen to hear what this is about, but also, as you know, strong interests in calibration and validation, interested to see what you're developing in that space. Cheers.
Thanks, Tim. Matt Miles.
Thanks, Stuart. Matt Miles. I work with the South Australian Department for Environment and Water. I have been involved in the previous workshops on land use and land cover, and I've been involved in the ACLUMP program for quite a few years now. So really great to see this conversation filling out to be more right across the country with industry and research as well. Thanks, Stuart.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Arne Nakad.
Yep, on the card, Queensland Herbarium. We are mapping the Queensland vegetation, regional ecosystem, and now trying to also look at condition. And just to emphasize that it's not only woody vegetation, we're also looking at the grasslands communities.
Cool. Thanks, Arne. Lucy Randall.
Hi there, Lucy Randall from ABARES. I'm just listening in to see what you guys are doing for the land use and the land cover, but I've been involved in the ACLUMP program for many years.
Thanks, Lucy. Jim Watson.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I'm working with Stuart and Tim Gallagher in the JRSRP, looking at ways of delivering cover and disturbing time series products.
Cool. Thanks, Jim. Flora Kerbelat.
Hi, Stuart. Hi, everyone. I'm Flora from CSIRO, from the Center for Earth Observation, and I work in international activities. My main interest is about the SDG 15.3.1 about land cover that I'm looking after with Neil Sims in CSIRO for our work in CEOS with the other space agencies. So happy to see where all this is going. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Michael Chang's video and mic aren't working, so he's just posted his details in the chat. He's a senior lecturer at Macquarie using remote sensing for land cover and land use mapping and change detection for environmental management as well. George Dyke.
Hi, Stuart. Hi, everyone. I'm with Symbios Communications. I'm listening in, I think, quite interested in a lot of this area. 3 specific projects that we're involved with that might touch on this would be the Open Data Cube project with Geoscience Australia and CSIRO, as well as Global Forest Observations Initiative and GeoGLAM. So we have sort of project management roles with all of those, and I'm interested in hearing about the latest in this community.
Cool. Thanks, George. Who have I not spoken to? Zhangju Shen. Might have to unmute yourself. All right, might come back to Zhangju. I think, sorry, the two screens. Oh, Wendy Thompson.
Hi, Stuart. Wendy Thompson from EPA in Western Australia. I deal with both addressing cumulative impacts at a state level and improving decision-making using, remote sensing and Earth observation technology in government for Western Australia.
Thanks, Wendy. Phil Norman. Oh, where'd Phil go? There we go.
Now I'm right. Hi, everyone. It's Phil Norman here from the Queensland Department of Environment and Science. I work in the Remote Sensing Centre, and currently I'm managing the land use mapping program that Craig Shepherd formerly managed and that Moritz mentioned earlier that he'd been doing a review of.
Thanks, Phil. Nathan Eaton.
Thanks, Stuart. Nathan from NGIS Australia, representing industry, and we're focused on implementing cloud-based DO solutions and certainly looking for opportunities to leverage the land cover and land use datasets.
Thanks, Nathan. And Arndt, I don't see a surname.
Unmute. Hi, this is Arndt. Mostly just listening in. I used to work at the New South Wales Department of Environment and Climate Change, creating the statewide woody vegetation maps. And currently I'm overseas setting up a remote sensing institute. I'm just having my ears on the ground, and maybe I can learn something on what's happening back in Australia and maybe emulate some of that over here.
Thanks, Arndt. And, okay, Tim Devereaux from QUT.
Yeah, my name's Tim. I am an honours student at QUT. My background is in computer science and environmental science. I'm currently working with orbital LiDAR and high performance computer clusters to basically measure vegetation structure at large scales.
Thanks, Tim. And Simon Allen.
Hi there, Stuart. I'm for Simon Allen, CSIRO Agriculture and Food, working the climate adaptation and threshold space and looking at hyperspectral data, reconciling it against crop modelling.
Thanks. And then there's two people who I can't see their names. There's Tal, is one of them.
Hi everybody, Tal Fangers from Israel. I'm with the Israel Aerospace Industries. Thanks for the invitation. And we're developing in our industry software for automated land cover and land use mapping from multispectral and hyperspectral data. And I just joined in to know more about these initiatives and be happy to help.
Well, thanks, Tal. And then there was someone, I don't know if they're on the phone, but it says MCV 013.
That'd be Tim McVicker, Stuart.
Oh, okay. He's trying to be anonymous.
Yes, he is.
Thanks, Tim Malthus.
Very oddly, yes.
All right. Yeah, Tim, McVicker, if you do want to introduce yourself, you can. But if not, that's okay. All right. I did say three people to the end. So Jane Stewart, I think you're still there. You just want to unmute yourself and introduce.
Hello. Jane Stewart from Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment in ABARES, and I've as we're directly involved in the production of national scale land use, have an interest in land cover, and we coordinate the Australian Collaborative Land Use and Management program that draws on the state-based land use mapping products.
Thanks, Jane. So I've sort of kept Jane and then Norman and Ala to the end, because some of the people on this call have been in the other 2 workshops that we've had here, and a lot of you haven't. So it is quite a mixed group today. The last 2 people, I'll just get to introduce themselves, Norman Mueller and Ala Metlenko. Just briefly, I mean, Ala's responsible for helping to set up Earth Observation for Government Network with Alexis McIntyre when she was at Geoscience Australia. And Norman's also had a large role in pushing EOGN forward. So I'll let them both introduce themselves.
Would you like us to do it in tandem? Norman
First, Norm.
Thanks, Ella. Norman Mueller from Geoscience Australia. I'm a Director of Product Development for Digital Earth Australia. I lead the Australian Land Cover project within DEA in collaboration with Richard Lucas from the University of Aberystwyth in Wales.
Cool. Thanks, Norman.
Ala Metlenko from Geoscience Australia. I'm the Director for Data Enabling Services. At the moment, I'm overseeing their Copernicus program, data flows into Australia. But EOGN is close to my heart, something we commenced a couple of years ago in form of conception, and now seeing it rolled out. So thanks to Larissa and Stuart and EOA. We look forward to holding more of these workshops as the various topics and themes outlined in Stuart's presentation.
Thanks. Thanks, Ella and Norman. And then I think last but not least, so Larissa, do you just want to introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Larissa Marfan, based at University of Queensland, working with Earth Observation Australia.
Thanks, Larissa. So just to clarify again, everybody, I mean, I think we've done quite well in getting representation across different states and territories, different agencies in states and territories, and research institutions and industry. So thanks, everybody, for taking the time. Just going to share my screen again briefly. So we're down at, I guess, that 4th dot point there. The areas of discussion which we are going to look at for the remaining time that we have is about research directions for land use and land cover products, and new product and service assessment for the different potential data sets that could be used in these areas. So that'll be one section. And then there's another section on, given the priority research directions we might choose, are there some key strategic directions to take? How does that relate to use of collaborative research infrastructure, facilities like TURN and others, particularly for calibration and validation? And also, if we're trying to make sure that we're building capability in this area of people that are able to produce these products and services in all of our different components, how do we make sure we get people coming through and trained in these areas? And then at the end of today, we'll just do a brief summary and explain here's how we'll progress to the transition planning document and what the next stages will actually be. So that's the rest of today. So what we're going to ask you to do now, and I see Tim McVicker's just typed in his outline there. So thanks, Tim, for doing that. All right. So just what I might ask Larissa to do, and so a couple of things, is the link to a form which we're going to use to start you thinking and then have a discussion around it. Larissa just posted you the link to the form there. It's in several stages as you go through it. And the intention is that we complete a section and then have a discussion and then move on to the next session. I should say that what you are typing into there, we will collect that as information from the workshop. Sorry, the other thing I should have said right at the start is, yes, we are recording the audio and video of this as well as what's in the chat window too. So hopefully everybody's all right with that. Apologies for not stating that earlier on. So just in terms of what we're looking at with the questions, this is what you'll see when you log into that page. Your name, your organisation, and then we go through essentially a series of sections. And as indicated, the first one we'd like you to spend some time thinking about. As some of you work in this area, I do know this is front of mind and you know what should be built. If you're coming at it from a research point of view, please put it in that area. Like, are there new data sets you're testing for land cover and land use that could add to it? New algorithms, new integrated ways of doing things. So these first three questions are about looking forward. What are key topics for algorithm development and testing? Land use mapping in particular is something that still is manually conducted to a certain extent, but we're seeing quite a large shift to semi-automated and automated approaches, and state and territory governments and private industry have invested a lot of time and money in building these capabilities, whether it's for looking for individual land uses or for looking at an area in general. So is there any specific algorithm development and testing ideas? One of the other points to consider there is bigger picture questions like, should there be a validation data set which people test their, let's say, land use mapping, AI or machine learning routines against to see if it's fit for purpose at state and territory level or nationally. The concept of a test bed, which is used in other industries where people come in and demonstrate that their technologies, approaches do or don't work against a benchmark as well. Is that something that as a community we could suggest going forward, and that ACCLUMP and NCLUMP might also take that on? So that fits in there. That sort of links into the second question around field measurement programs for calibration and validation. Obviously, again, for machine learning and AI, you are limited by your training data set and your validation data set. Is there a need to set up standard land use, land cover, training and validation data sets to use for certain land use applications or certain geographic areas that might help everyone? I mean, should Digital Earth Australia host, a national repository of training sites for land use mapping, which ACCLUMP's approved? I don't know, something along those lines as well. Other things along those lines, where you have users, particularly, let's say, in agriculture and horticulture for land use and land cover, do you want to give them the ability to validate the maps that you've produced for their properties and send information back? I mean, that does a couple of things. It means the people who are using your maps get to see whether they are working or not, and also develop some involvement in their production and some level of confidence in the map product. There's been a number of apps developed for this application. Craig Shepherd developed this as part of the initial national horticulture land use mapping activity, and that worked to engage with some groups but not with others. So that, it's not just the data itself, it's mechanisms for collecting the data. And then other new data sets that could be pulled in as well. So I'm going to stop there for approximately 5 to 10 minutes maximum and open it up to everybody. What I would like people to do is just spend the next 10 minutes on going through and typing in answers to those questions. If you don't have responses, that's fine. Go to the next one. And then after that, we'll have a brief summary discussion and then move on to the next session as well. So I'm just going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to go on mute for 10 minutes. So if you're having trouble accessing the forms, let us know and we can work with you to do that. If you want some clarification, let me know. I'll sit here and be on mute until required. So 9 minutes from now, and I'll stop talking.
Stuart, where was the link? You went on mute straight away.
Sorry, Simon. Larissa, could you resend the link? Because people have gone in and out of the session. You only get the chat window from when you join.
Ah, okay.
So Simon,
it's in the chat window. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
It's there now. Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, about a minute or so left. So just a couple of thoughts while people are finishing things off. We know this approach works for some people, but not everyone. So, you know, if you're not comfortable writing what you want to put in now, feel free to email them to myself and Larissa after the workshop. What you will type in there, we will take into account and essentially try to summarize that to work out directions for going forward in this particular area. And sometimes people want to go and do a little bit of extra work and get supporting references and put them in as well. So just keep that in mind if you don't get through what's required there. You know, our aim here is really to look at the diversity of responses and see how we can use that to move this whole area forward. So with that, what we'll do now for the next 5 or so minutes, and then we'll have a little break, I think. I just wanted to hand it back to the floor and ask if anyone did have any specific either comments or questions or points of clarification around whether it's the data sources that could potentially be used, the algorithms that could be used, and then the integration with field measurement. And that could also link into how would this also all potentially link in with the Australian Collaborative Land Use Mapping Program or the National Committee on Land Use and Management Information process as well, as that's something that's been discussed in the last couple of days. So I don't know if people have any thoughts, questions, queries. Different states and territories are doing different approaches. It'd be interesting to hear if anyone's been through any systematic large area assessment of machine learning or AI based approaches with current data sets in terms of land use and land cover mapping, or is that something that people are still thinking about doing as well? Any general thoughts or reactions from people? You can type it into the chat window, or you know, feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, sorry, Norman, you got your hand up. You might just have to speak up a little bit too with the mic. Yeah.
No worries. Thanks, Stuart. We have been doing quite a lot in that domain, mainly through contracting to ANU in the first place, but there's some good work going on down at Monash as well. And we'd like to spread that out, of course. But the example I want to go with is that Dale Roberts actually not working directly for us at DEA, but working with our minerals section in Geoscience Australia, came up with the barest earth model of Australia, which took the entire Landsat archive from DEA and processed it, looking for its barest point. It's got a great Nature article on that now. Real kudos to Dale and to John Wilford for putting that through. But there's a great example there of taking machine learning and actually applying it to spectral information and temporal information in the one go. And Dale has really been doing a lot of work in doing that combination of spatial and temporal in one sort of set. So there's a huge amount of stuff going on in that machine learning area, and I think there's a real opportunity to build some great new techniques and some maybe I don't know, community of practice, something along those lines. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear what other people are doing too.
Right. I think that the community of practice idea is an interesting one, and is partly where I was trying to go to are some of the points I made about, you know, is this the right time to start thinking about, you know, that there's a national sort of repository or space where, you know, the approved land use or land cover training data sets are, you know, which can be used in different areas. I mean, it's a substantial amount of work to collect those data sets. I mean, it's, you know, it might be, a parallel might be, you know, the image chips which are used for automated georeferencing. It could be something similar to that. So that's something down the track. Any of the states and territories experimenting with AI, machine learning, or newer sort of spatial temporal composites as well? No, type things in the chat window or just, go, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So the project that I mentioned earlier, where we're collaborating with state government and our Adelaide Institute, or the Australian Institute for Machine Learning at University of Adelaide, that started as a project that was going to be machine learning with a little bit of remote sensing to improve land cover assessment or land condition assessment for the pastoral leases. A year into the project, I think the machine learning people have learned a huge amount about Earth observation, and we've been able to demonstrate how rich the spatial and temporal data is that we routinely work with. They actually didn't really have that insight at the beginning. And initially, they thought, you know, machine learning could do everything. What did we have to offer? But in fact, understanding the nature of Earth observation data, what the biophysical properties are that it's captured, and some knowledge of the environment that it's being applied to, that has turned out to be very, very important. And the machine learning people are still working out how they can add to that and enhance that.
Okay. So and is that continuing at like longer term?
Yeah. So phase one of the project was what I've just described. Phase two is taking what we've done with time series of MODIS imagery, predominantly some Landsat, and trying to calibrate it against the on-ground measurements that the field assessments or field assessment teams have been collecting for decades. And that's proving to be very difficult. I can see you smirking. That's always the difficult challenge. And then, yes, I think after all of that, the machine learning people might start to get to play a bit more with some of what they propose or think they can do. Yeah. So I'm very interested to hear about the example that Norman mentioned earlier, though, of machine learning that really is capitalising on the spatial and temporal richness of data.
Great, thanks, Megan. I think that's started to uncover a couple of key points that would be good to dig into afterwards, and that's the idea of the transition planning here. I see, you look at the comments, Tim McVicker and Jim Watson have sort of alluded to a couple of things. Tim supporting what you just said, and I think a lot of us deal with that. The realization that you've just described, Megan, when people, algorithm-specific developments are like, oh, this is actually complicated. But it is something where if you combine experience of how it's going to be used with the processing, that the approach should be more effective. And this is partly why I'm trying to suggest there could be a role of linking, down from ACCLUMP into, helping us develop standard training sets and other things like that. And I think that there are different state agencies that are doing bits and pieces of these testing things going on. Jim Watson's flagged what New South Wales is doing. Matt Adams has indicated in WA they're starting more on land cover assessment. And then Kristen Williams from CSIRO, it's looking at sort of time series analysis work and multiple variables there. And then Maritz has highlighted some of the work which has started in Queensland, noting that Phil might comment on it if he's not distracted at the moment. I don't know if, Phil, if you are listening, did you want to say a few words on the testing that's been done in Queensland in terms of machine learning potential for a range of things from, I guess, woody cover through to land use, land cover? And while Phil is thinking about it, there are several PhDs around the country specifically looking at land use, land cover modelling that could potentially fit into this area, and that's something we've started to look at as in EOGN as a plug-in as well. And we can pull these things. All right, just before we move on to the next part, I did just want to maybe go to the people who are on ACCLUMP and CLUMI. So I think so Jane, Matt, Lucy, and Phil and others. That suggestion of setting up a standard set of training and validation data that match what land use, land cover classes, is that worth pursuing? One or all of you could answer it. That.
Stuart, it seems an interesting idea to me. It's a bit analogous to what I guess some of the photogrammetry people have done in the past, of having standard classification or training data sets, so people can come along with new algorithms and, you know, give them a workout, and you're kind of comparing them on an equal footing. And so, perhaps there's a need for that now in the space that we're operating in with, let's say, new machine learning approaches and so on coming into play. Sounds to me as though there's a good case for it.
Thanks, Megan. Just to clarify, this isn't suggesting we get 50 different versions of all of your land use and land cover maps straight away, but to help build capability that could then potentially be used, you know, if it meets the standards that's required. You know, we understand there is that need for authoritative data sets and a standards process there as well. So just before we move to the next section, I just note Maritz and Craig have posted links to some of the testing that's been going on in Queensland with the automated land classification. There's the Esri link there, and then there's also a link to Andy Clark and John McKechnie's paper as well that's worth looking at. All right, just being conscious of time, we might move on just to the next section, and I'm just going to share my screen again. All right, so I'll just set a bit of context and then we'll get into these questions. So the final set of questions is, given that there's a wide variety of potential research changes in terms of data sets that are coming online that we can use. We heard several people give examples of spatial temporal time series. You know, we've got much higher spatial resolution, high repeat frequency data. We have imaging radar data sets with structural information. What are some, I guess, issues that are nationally and strategically important that people feel could or should be developed to keep our land use and land cover mapping programs at the forefront of what they're doing? And you know, there's government perspectives to that, private industry and research. So we're trying to pull out what those different thoughts are. The second one here is on research infrastructure. I alluded to that before, just to put it in context again. Our national collaborative research infrastructure is a set of, it's field data, it's resources, it's measurement, approaches, it's image data sets and processing, where we can link together state and territory and Commonwealth approaches. I know ACLUMP and NCLUMI do that formally at a Commonwealth level. The whole idea of NCRIS research infrastructure, is to provide capabilities for us to do things at a national level and link together industry, research, and government in actually doing it. And it's been the basis of pulling together our national fractional cover mapping approaches, which have then ended up in Digital Earth Australia, looking at all of the national vegetation height estimates, a lot of the work that's gone on with LIDAR, a lot of that's been driven through essentially research infrastructure, enabling our research groups and state and Commonwealth agencies to share information and move together. And so that they are worth considering, and I know I keep going back to this, but that example of training data for land use and land cover, that could be something that's kept in research infrastructure as a training data set for people to build and validate their algorithms. And again, we're not saying the expectation is that it all goes through to land use and land cover mapping, but by putting it in a capability like that, you open up the number of people doing research, and research that's focused on government applications, to a much, much broader group than if you just leave it sort of locked up in one area or a government portal. So do think about research infrastructure. And then the last one, Megan alluded to this in talking about getting the people doing the algorithm development and the processing comfortable with using, say, Earth observation data or geospatial data. It's often a lot richer and more multidimensional than people developing and applying these processing approaches traditionally in computational analysis may be used to, or they may be more used to it. So where do we need to develop people's skills so we've got that next generation of people who can do good land use, land cover mapping, whether it's within a local government area, a state or nationally, and who are able to bring all different data sources together to do it and to enable it to be done to set standards. And then the last question is sort of a catch-all around any other comments. So given where we are time-wise, if we could spend the last 5 minutes having a go at some of that, maybe a little bit later on, and then just before 3 o'clock we'll do a bit of a wrap-up, 3 o'clock in the Eastern States, sorry, a bit of a wrap-up and point out where we're going next, okay? And if people have got questions, points of clarification now, yeah, you can ask those while we get into it.
Stuart, it's Matt Miles here.
Hey, Matt. Yep, go ahead, Matt.
Just one point around, we're talking a lot here about a lot of different sources of data, and those, we're not talking about a single new methodology for wall-to-wall land use mapping. So I guess there's going to be a real challenge for us to, how do we come to some agreements, firstly about terminology. There'll be some language issues in there. We do have some classifications that we work with at the moment. Will they be sufficient going forward as we, break open some new doors perhaps? And then also, I guess, the governance around arriving at a national product, or will in fact it be a whole bunch of different national products, and we won't have the need for a wall-to-wall land use map? I suspect we probably will, but I guess, yeah, so those two issues of consistency around language and developing those standards, as well as, yeah, governance at the end of the day to sort of differentiate our way towards that authoritative product that we've talked about in some of these workshops.
Thanks for clarifying that, Matt. I mean, that was the point I was really trying to push before, is that, I mean, it's all well and good to do all of these different approaches, but that end process that says, right, this is what gets filtered up to the final state and territory and the final national one, that those processes do need to be in place. So is that what you were getting at, that we need to make sure that those sort of the final step up, you know, that it's communicated clearly, you know, this is how, you know, ACLUMP was arrived at to begin with, and how the current national classification that Digital Earth Australia is producing were arrived at, and that this is work trying to figure out better inputs into those things that may or may not go forward.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the methods that Norman's, you know, going through now with the land cover, it kind of embodies that, you know, different data sources, but he's got one methodology. There's a single organisation who's running that at the end of the day and cranking the handle. Land use, I think, is going to be, I don't know, is it going to be same or different? Yeah, it's just that there'll be challenges in that area for us. I think what we're doing here is we're really throwing the doors open to what research is out there and the way that we can look to capture different land uses. The tricky bit is that land use itself is not actually directly observable. You have to interpret. There is an abstraction to come to land use. Commodity map, that's a bit different. Land cover, that's, you know, you can observe these things, but land use. So I think there's some debate for us to have around how that classification, that language is going to settle down.
If I can
go, Simon.
Yeah. I guess if we're playing across into that big data machine learning world, then we move away from making sure that we've got the individual groups and classifications right, and make sure we've got the methodologies and the descriptors right for the parameters that we're using to make those differentiations, because it's very, very clear in the COCO image recognition data set that you know, that if you had something that was called a person and something that was called a man, then they would have 99% similarity, and so you'd be able to bundle them. But because you're working with the right descriptors below that, the right metrics of likeness, so it's not the classes that we need to worry about, but what the metrics are that describe those classes.
Thanks, Simon. I think that's the start of a much larger discussion, and I think it links up with what Matt's suggested quite well, because this also came up in the vegetation mapping discussion in terms of the issue of process versus end product or service, and, you know, which one of those are we looking at? And, you know, in the case of land use and land cover, those attributes will need to be looked at together, possibly more closely than the vegetation one. And I think, if anything, what those last 2 points are leading to is that, you know, this is ideally when we look through what comes out of the survey responses from these 3 workshops on land use and land cover, that there is an established mechanism in place. The land use, the land cover one is about to be delivered. There's a lot of potential new research that could deliver into those. It's dealing with new algorithms and new data, but that interface and the way that there's a fit for use of algorithms or products needs to be looked at carefully. And then that, ideally, how that work gets presented in a way that, you know, government and industry can also choose to interact with it and use for their purposes needs to be thought about as well. So it's Yeah, and that's the reason for these workshops, is to get a sense of, well, what is there at each end of the operational end, and sort of research end, and do they meet up, and if they don't, what could we do to make it better and work more effectively as well. So, all right, I'm just noting Tal's comment before he leaves in terms of CalVal efforts and how a particular group could contribute to this area. I think we have a number of groups here and overseas that are working in these areas. If you look across the commercial groups, like who are on here today, I mean, if you look at basically everyone from Frontier through to NGIS and other groups, there's a whole range of people applying different techniques for different services here that we could bring together more effectively in terms of going forwards. Right. Okay. And then just a comment from Wendy Thompson there, the terminology issue from a state perspective. Land use is related to policy and legislation, and that's similar at state and Commonwealth level, and we need agreements for going across those different levels of government, and also bilateral agreement development for assessments and agreement in the EIA space. So, well, cool. All right, and just conscious of time, and what I might do, given that we have been on for an hour and a half and haven't had a break, is try and close things here as a number of people are leaving. Just to highlight what will happen next, as I said, if you can fill out this afterwards, that would be really helpful. If you can stay on and fill it out now, that's great. Essentially just throwing back to that outline of how these workshops progress. What will happen after today is Larissa and myself will sit down and take the material that we've collected in the notes and use that to prepare a transition planning document, which is, here's where we are at the moment in terms of operational activities, and these are research ready, research proven, or just at the research level, and here's how we could potentially move them forward, particularly in the land use, land cover area. I think in this area, more than vegetation, the role of a national coordinating body, so NCLUMI, and its role with ACLUM is something that will be presented here, as this is an existing mechanism that's potentially going towards feeding into standards definitions for land use and land cover. So whatever we do here should feed into that. We're aiming to get drafts of these transition plans done within the next 2 months. We have another workshop on water applications in several weeks, and then we'll try and finish everything off to get it out for everyone to look at and keep this process going. And as we do it, we'll try to update the capability database, which lists all the products and services that we have. So I'll just stop sharing there. So with that, I'll close things off for today. Thanks everybody for your time for the hour and a half. I know that's a decent chunk of everybody's day. I know this is sometimes frustrating because it's brief and jumps into things and jumps out of it. But if you do want to add more detail to your response, please do so. Or if you want to follow up, let us know. Everybody who's part of the workshop will get a copy of the summary report, and we'll keep you engaged with activities in this area over time. We were going to have a Whole of Earth Observation Government Network meeting in September at the initial Earth Observation Forum, but that's now been postponed till next year in August. So I know that's a lot of time from now to next year, but we will be still having a similar national sort of recap meeting at that point in terms of where we're going. So with that, again, thanks everybody for your time and your contributions and patience today. Particularly thanks to Larissa for getting everything set up and going today and making it smoothly, and also for Norman and Alla at GA for making it happen. So I look forward to catching up with everybody. Stay safe, and we'll talk again soon. See ya.